lot of cases, sales and marketing were not working together despite the fact that they have a very common goal, which is generating revenue.
What are the elements that actually create predictable revenue from your experience?
I think it's, quite frankly, having a system in place that gives you transparency into what's happening in your go-to-market funnels, where you come up with a theory, you go experiment to try and either prove or disprove that theory, and then you recycle at the end and say, yes, that worked and it delivered the results we were looking for, or no, it didn't. How do we need to change the experiment to produce the desired result?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming to today's podcast. Today we have Carter with us from Revenue Chemists, someone who I'm being very excited to talk to. A lot of information with regards to revenue systems and what most founders think their biggest problem is, and that's leads. But the truth is, as Carter will run us through, most companies don't have a lead problem. They have a revenue system problem. Leads aren't the issue. And so today's guest, Carter, is going to talk us through having spent decades inside companies solving exactly that issue. Carter is a co-founder of Revenue Chemists, a consultancy that helps companies move from chaotic founder-led sales to predictable, scalable revenue systems. He and his company have scaled multiple companies together, worked with businesses navigating the messy $1 million to $10 million growth phase, and now are sharing their frameworks in their upcoming book, Revenue Chemistry. In this conversation, we're going to talk about what actually breaks when companies try to scale, why most go-to-market strategies fail, how AI is quietly transforming sales and marketing, and what founders should really focus on if they want to build something that lasts. Carter, welcome to the show.
Dylan, it's great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So, you're based in North Carolina. I hear the weather's slightly better, but you've lived all over the US and even spent time in the United Kingdom. What shaped your early worldview?
I think I think there are two periods. There was a kind of a school period where, whether I was at university or earlier, I had an opportunity to spend some time in the UK, actually up in Shropshire at the schools, Shrewsbury. And then later in life, have had multiple opportunities to manage revenue teams in the UK. So have been fortunate to spend quite a bit of time in the country and in London proper.
Fantastic. And so, when you think about what sort of changed your view, or sort of like a moment where you realize that, what your focus wants to be or needs to be, or what you really have interest in that fires you up across your travels and that time, what and when was that? And can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think, so I affectionately call it being bit by the scaling bug, and a self-professed scaling junkie. And I would say the real inflection point, or when I got bit, early in my career, I went to work for Xerox, and initially as an individual contributor, over a 10-year period, climbed the management ranks to do a bunch of different jobs. But I was managing a dealer channel at the time, and this is about halfway through my tenure, and it was the country's largest dealer, covered 55,000 customers, and they decided that they were going to defect and go to a competitor, and they gave me 30 minutes notice that they were going to do this. And so I spent the next 3 days kind of in a mad scramble trying to put everything back together, and then over a 3-year period, put the business back together and actually was successful in growing it. And so that was kind of my first real scaling experience, and I got the opportunity to do it under the umbrella of an $18 billion company. So it was a lot of fun. I had, resources and help. shortly after Xerox, I moved into the SaaS world and started scaling SaaS companies, and really learned that I love the process, its complexity. It's while there are some similarities across companies, each one is a little bit unique. So it's a great intellectual problem to solve.
For sure. I mean, it seems, by the sound of it, you and your business partner have scaled multiple companies together. So what would you say, whether it's Xerox or whether it's a smaller company, and of course every company has their own unique niches, as it were. What patterns, however, did you start to notice across those experiences?
I think the first pattern that I noticed was, in a lot of cases, sales and marketing were not working together, despite the fact that they have a very common goal, which is to generate. Both functions are responsible for generating revenue, ultimately for the company. And it was surprising to me that there weren't common goals, that there wasn't a common language. And so my business partner and I, my business partner is a CMO, he and I ultimately scaled 3 companies together, and we, in the process of doing that, figured out an operating rhythm between sales and marketing where our goals were aligned. So we had a common set of goals, we had a common set of metrics, and then we met every single week to say what's working, what's not, and what are we going to do about it. So I think that's the biggest, as I look across the scaling process, that's one of the biggest things I see early stage companies not getting right. They tend to either have a bias towards sales, or a bias towards marketing, or a bias towards engineering.
Wow. So I'm hearing a couple of things there. It's communication, so that the different areas are on the same page. But what do you think the reason is why within the same company, if the goals are to bank more sales, that there might be not necessarily opposing agendas, but like agendas that aren't necessarily aligned when the goal is the same goal?
I think at the most strategic level, it starts with aligning the sales and marketing leader on a common set of goals and a common compensation structure, right? And so if you can have a shared set of goals, but if we're getting compensated on different things, then we're naturally going to be driven towards those independent things. If, on the other hand, we're both compensated on the same thing, then we have a shared interest to do whatever we can to leverage that area and achieve the greatest result we can.
Interesting, right? You've got within one company different metrics by which your performance is judged and therefore you're compensated on, and it's almost odd that a CEO or the C-suite would have that in place, because it's just naturally humans are going to do what serves them best ultimately, and to not have that aligned is just, it doesn't intuitively make sense that someone would even put that in place, let alone allow people to operate in that manner.
Yeah, but I think, look, I think one of the major changes in the last 10 years in the go-to-market or sales and marketing arena is the transparency of what's actually going on behind the curtain, right? So, you used to not be able to tell if somebody was visiting your website, or if they had opened your emails, or, how long they were spending, researching on your website or other areas. So we now have a lot of digital signals that allow us to understand what's happening further up the funnel in the interest generation and awareness creation area that we didn't before. And so, I don't necessarily think it's the fault of previous leaders that they haven't figured this out. It's that the systems have really evolved to a point where now it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It just allows people better data at their fingertips where it wasn't as clear previously. And
that's right.
I think that's key, right? Data is gold, but it's actually only gold if it's presented in the right way, right?
Well, and if it's credible data, I mean, you know, garbage in, garbage out, right? So, you know, you've gotta, and that's, you know, oftentimes I hear sales and marketing teams pushing back about the CRM or this or that or the other thing, and the reality is, unless we're using it accurately, then it becomes more of a burden than it does an asset. And if we're using it correctly, then we as leaders, we can tell all sorts of things from there in terms of stage by stage conversion and activity levels and all sorts of other things that help decode the selling process or the go-to-market process even broader, that we can leverage to improve our results.
Right, absolutely. So when you know, look at companies, as I understand them from what I've read, like most companies hit turbulence between the $1 million revenue stage and the $10 million revenue stage. What actually breaks that makes it so turbulent?
The reality is just about everything. So, you know, look, in most cases, you get to $1 million or $3 million based on founder-led sales, and in most cases, that is identified by two big things. One, the founder's network. Who can they talk to that they've worked with before or know before that might be able to help them or actually buy the new product that they're selling? And then two, a lot of hustle, right? Founders, you don't start a business if you're not willing to burn the candle at both ends and do whatever is necessary to be successful. So those early days of revenue are generally defined by the founder or the founding team getting out there and hustling really hard to get revenue, and using their network to do that. Obviously, as you begin to scale, you know, founder has limited bandwidth, right? There's only 24 hours in a day. They need some sleep. So, you know, their bandwidth ultimately becomes limited. So we've got to hire people to go out and do the selling for us. And so we need to transfer that knowledge to them. They also need to start putting in place a selling framework or a selling process, right? Defining the stages or steps that a buyer goes through as they're evaluating a product or service and making a decision. And so those are some of the early things that break in that scaling journey. We also, on the higher up in the funnel, we also have to learn how to create more demand, right? Because we go from the founder's network to now going out and having to figure out who are the customers in the market that we serve, how do we need to communicate with them to get them interested in evaluating our solution.
Got it. So, I mean, in your opinion, what do you think the hardest transition is when moving from founder-led sales to a real sales organization?
I mean, I think there's two things, which is one, the founder letting go, because, you know, in most cases they've spent, you know, multiple years getting to this stage of growth, and they're reluctant to, as the saying goes, let go of their baby, right? So that is important. The other thing that we often see people missing is sales process. The founder kind of intuitively knows the product, figures out how to cobble together the conversations, and ultimately get the deal done. Once we're hiring external people, we need to have steps or stages in the selling process. We need to define it so that each person on the team that's responsible for sales knows where they are, knows what they should be doing to move or advance the sale forward. So it's, you know, breaking those old habits of the founder network and putting in place a process that others can use and adapt to sell the product or service.
So standing operating procedures based on how the founder believes a sale should be made or a process that is effective in selling based on the founder's knowledge of said product to get it over the line.
That's right. Yep.
So then you're looking at systems, processes, some sort of like, sales leadership in that regard, and people as they scale miss that.
They do, mostly because they don't understand the level of effort required to make that transition. And so, you see a lot of a lot of early stage companies either hiring incorrectly or not defining their process, and so they get themselves in a position where they're spending a lot of money, because let's face it, sales and marketing resources are expensive, and not achieving the result that they need to achieve to continue to be financially viable.
Right. So then, in your opinion, when founders say we just need more leads, what do you think is usually the real problem underneath?
I think it's my first question to them is, okay, let's understand what your entire funnel looks like and how you're converting across the funnel. Because while you say you may need more leads, if, for example, we're only closing 1 or 2% of the opportunities we talk to, then I would tell you we've got more than likely a positioning or a market issue, right? Because we're not able to attract enough people. So it's not, in that case, it's not that you don't have enough leads. It might be that the leads are either the wrong people, right? They're not folks that are interested in what we're selling, or the selling process is not fine-tuned to convey the value that the solution delivers.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's quite complex, isn't it, to get that done? And when have you seen people turn around to you and say, "Right, I need help"? Are they then open to actually listening to you?
There's a joke that my business partner and I have, and that is that we get invited to the best dumpster fires, which is essentially, look, no one calls and asks to talk to a fractional revenue leader or a coach or a consultant unless they haven't been able to figure it out on their own, right? And so a lot of the situations that we get involved in are situations where they had a sales and marketing leader that failed, took the organization in the wrong direction, or weren't able to achieve the results, where they've mishired and that person didn't work out, or where the founder is more self-aware and understands, hey, I don't have the skill set to build and manage a sales team and to set this all up. I need some help, somebody who can do this and who does it on a regular basis.
Right. Cool. Makes sense. So the name Revenue Chemists, very interesting. Why chemistry?
My partner and I discovered early in our working relationship that we could approach things on an experimental basis. And so we constructed a tool that we call the Demand Gen Planner, that is a tool that looks at conversion at every step of the go-to-market funnel. So all the way from early intent and website visits, all the way through closed won and potentially renewal. And we would look at our performance on a weekly basis, and we would identify 1 or 2, no more than 3 areas that we wanted to try and impact, and we'd come up with a hypothesis, and we'd say, hey, our webinar leads are not converting at a rate that we find acceptable. Why do we think that is? What are we going to do about it? And so we'd agree that, okay, we're going to change the topic of the webinar because we don't think we're attracting the right audience. We're going to go execute on that and then come back and measure it. And so it's very much like the chemical process, where you come up with a theory, you go experiment to try and either prove or disprove that theory, and then you recycle at the end and say, yes, that worked and it delivered the results we were looking for, or no, it didn't. How do we need to change the experiment to produce the desired results?
Wow. Okay. So then, what if you could describe in a bit more detail? So, what are the elements that actually create predictable revenue from your experience?
I think it's quite frankly having a system in place that gives you transparency into what's happening in your go-to-market funnel. So, from the top in terms of marketing qualified leads, how many of those are you getting a week? Where are they coming from? How are they converting to sales qualified leads? Once we've got a sale in the process, how do we do discovery? How do we do demonstration? How do we do proposal? How do we do negotiation? And what are the conversion rates all the way through that process? Because that gives us a fact-based foundation to start to conduct those chemistry experiments, right? And so we can pick areas of the funnel where we're not converting as well as we want to, go run an experiment in that area and see if we can improve the results.
So you're really looking at each stage and seeing what the weak point is.
Correct.
Right. So which makes sense. So that's meticulous monitoring, looking at the data. Obviously, as you said quite correctly before, so long as the data is credible and good data, it's then like consistently monitoring what's not working and then solving that bit, right? Fixing for that bit.
That's right.
How difficult have you found it to fix those bits?
It depends on the bit, right? So some bits are very easy and can be solved more or less instantly. Other bits may require, several weeks or months of work as you work through that particular issue. I'll give you a perfect example. I'm working with a company that does a lot of selling into state and local governments right now. One of the things we discovered was that their sales and marketing database was pretty thin, so they didn't have a lot of accounts and contacts in their database where they could market to. And so one of the initiatives that we're undertaking there is to go out and find a state and local database that we can buy to improve the number of accounts and contacts that we have that our team of sellers can then go sell to.
Wow. Okay.
And that initiative is, a 2-month initiative. By the time we get the existing database cleaned up, get the new data in there, and start using it.
Wow. It's a process, right? It's a process, and actually, it's sort of, it should be something that we sort of can figure out ourselves, right? It's like, what's the information coming in? What does it look like? What isn't working? What isn't? But people just get lost in it because they don't, because they are so in the business, right? And they don't have time to step out of the business to look at it from outside, right? Which makes sense for founders doing everything to begin with.
Yeah, I think there's a saying we have that says you need to work on the business, not only in the business.
Right, for sure.
Right? And so you need so often you need to take a step back and look at things more strategically and understand, okay, how is the business growing? Are we hitting our objectives? Are there areas that we need to pay attention to? As an example, as a business, once you get kind of 5 million, 7 million, now customer success and customer support become much more important functions in a company, because now we have a customer base, depending on your average selling price, that might be, several hundred or several thousand customers.
Right. So what mistakes do you see founders making when they try to design their own go-to-market strategy?
I think most of them don't take into consideration the training or the onboarding process. So remember that as the founder, they are kind of all-seeing, all-knowing on everything in the company, right? They know where the skeletons are buried. They know how we got to a specific set of functionality or features. An external team or external people that weren't there and haven't been on that journey don't know all those things. And so you've got to physically teach them not only the product, but the process, and then you need to connect them with the people in the organization that can help them succeed. And so we don't necessarily see a lot of founders coming in with that process. Most of them will hire a salesperson initially, try and transfer their knowledge over to that salesperson, but don't really take the time to say, okay, what's our selling process? Let's start to set up some milestones. Let's start to collect some metrics so that we can evolve and scale.
Right. So if a founder listening today could fix one revenue system problem this quarter, what should it be?
I would say understand whether you have a training issue or a sales process issue, and you do that by looking at the stage by stage conversion for yourself and any reps that you have selling. And we'll cover that. As you mentioned, we've got a book coming out in the next couple months. Part of that book is tools like this that will help folks diagnose where they are and what the situation is so that they can fix it.
Wow. So, something that's, just moving tack a little bit, something that's changing the entire landscape right now is obviously artificial intelligence. So you work with multiple companies every year. How are you seeing AI actually used in sales and marketing today? And what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing the landscape in sales and marketing dramatically. I see generally two types of customers. I see the type that are kind of dipping their toe in the AI water, and they're using AI to do relatively simple things like account research or write email sequence or research a particular market or set of customers and come back with an analysis of that segment. Those folks are kind of dipping their toes in. They're using some of the functionality, but they're not really taking it to the fullest logical extent. The others, which are kind of, I'll call them more AI native, are really adopting AI. So they're using AI to do things like qualify inbound activity, right? So if somebody calls in or emails in and has questions about it, rather than routing that to a human or a sales development rep, they route it to an AI bot who responds to their inquiry and ultimately can book a meeting for your sales folks. I see other companies that are doing call analysis. So they take an output from Gong or another call recording platform and run a different analysis or framework against it to look at that. They compare across reps and across calls to identify areas of opportunity for training or improvement in the sales process. So the AI native folks are taking things much further, really looking at how they can remove substantial work and time from the system versus the folks that are kind of dipping their toe in, which are more clerical tasks like research reports, preparing for calls, that type of thing.
Right. So, I mean, it's getting into every single area. I mean, what surprised you most about how fast AI has entered the revenue stack?
I think just that. I mean, you think about 18 months ago, AI was, just on the very early precipice of doing things. At that point, the tool probably didn't have the horsepower to be an automated SDR or automated person to field inbound inquiries. But look how quickly the technology has evolved to the point where you now have companies that have multiple AI agents in the go-to-market process, whether it's lead scoring, identifying accounts that might have shown intent, in fielding inbound inquiries. We're seeing outbound AI SDRs now that are doing outbound research and outbound calling and emailing into prospects. So it's progressed pretty quickly.
It has, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, are there areas where you feel companies are overhyping AI?
Look, I think anytime you have a technology that explodes as quickly as AI has, you get folks that overhype it. I think while there was initially a lot of excitement and fervor over AI, I think really looking at the applications that are making an impact is really, really important. So while it's great that you can now complete research for a sales call in 5 minutes instead of 35 minutes, think about the impact that not having to hire an additional headcount to field inbound inquiries, that has a pretty material impact not only on HR, on your cost structure, but also on your responsiveness. You think about that AI bot. They don't take vacation. They don't sleep. They don't take days off. So they're on the job 24/7.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And conversely, where do you see companies underusing AI right now?
I think those that are just dipping their toe in the water. I mean, AI has the capability to dramatically impact your go-to-market process, whether it's doing account research or sales and marketing database upgrades or augmentations, all the way through to helping your company field inbound inquiries or do outbound inquiries. Mm-hmm. So there are significant areas where I think those companies that are just dipping their toe, just using research, take the next step, get an agent set up to help your reps do something. I'll give you a good example. So we talked a little bit earlier on, a lot of the founders don't pay attention to onboarding, and that's a particular challenge. Some of the work that I've seen companies doing that I think is really interesting is creating an AI agent like a concierge. And not only does that agent have access to all of the documentation materials that a company has, but they've asked the agent to design the training plan for the new hire. And so it becomes almost like a virtual onboarding assistant, because any question that the new hire has, they can go into the system and ask. The system also has all of the training materials and other things that the new hire will need to complete their onboarding.
And so do you think AI will make expertise more or less valuable?
I think it'll make expertise more valuable. And I think the differentiation I would point out is it's one, and I'll give you, and I think my role and what Revenue Chemists does is a perfect example. If you put, hey, I've got a go-to-market problem, it's this area or that area, what would you recommend I do? Guess what? The AI is going to come back and it'll probably, spit out a relatively credible answer based on its research. There's a difference between getting a white paper and implementing that white paper with somebody that actually has been there, done that, and understands, the path to get that implemented. And so I think it will put more emphasis on expertise for this set of people that are truly deep experts or subject matter experts in there, because they've had the experience of physically doing it, not just reading the white paper that AI spit out.
Yeah, no, for sure, right? I think ultimately, it's absolutely critical to understand that, humans still steer the ship, right?
That's right.
And it's up to us humans to discern what the AI is showing us and telling us to steer us on, to then not just put it in place blindly, but to discern what's right, what's not, how to tweak it, etc. Absolutely critical, because, and I've been saying this for like 2-3 years now, beyond or sort of way before, AI tools became sort of mainstream, and it genuinely is how optimally you use AI is going to be absolutely key. The better one knows how to use it is more prevalent than the fact that AI exists, right? So I think it's more a case of, okay, who's more adept at not just understanding how to use AI, but evolving with how AI progresses and adapting accordingly. And I think that's a big reframe on the whole upskilling conversation. I don't think it's just about upskilling. I think given the rate of change, as you just highlighted earlier on, AI a year ago is very different from AI today in terms of how it's being deployed and used. And that's only going to scale and grow and get faster and faster and faster. So it's going to be key for users to be able to also, in that same vein, adapt accordingly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think those people that are going to flourish are going to be the people that are good with change management, good at adapting to change, good at experimenting and trying new things. I think you'll see those folks accelerate faster than the folks that are maybe a little bit more conservative and not willing to experiment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So tell us about your book. You know, you're writing a book called Revenue Chemistry. Why write it now?
So my business partner and I have scaled 3 companies together, and in the process of doing that, I think we figured out a really solid operating rhythm together between sales and marketing. And, you know, we want to share those tools and what we learned with others out there so that they can, you know, take what we've learned and expand on it, not have to relearn what we've already learned and the mistakes we've already made. And so the book is an interesting perspective on the stages of growth, the tools required at each stage, and the metrics that are critical as you continue to scale your company. And I think we put a heavy emphasis on sharing the tools and the processes that we've used in an effort to give people tangible, implementable things that they can take to their business starting tomorrow.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, right? So who is it specifically aimed for? Who are you, when you're writing your book, who are you thinking of?
Yep, our ideal customer profile, if you will, is three constituents. So first and foremost, revenue leaders. So VPs of sales, CROs, CMOs that are in companies that are scaling. We're trying to provide a tool set for those practitioners and operators. The second set is CEOs of early stage companies. So, you know, part of the challenge is identifying that stage of growth and understanding how things need to change to get you to the next stage. And so clearly, you know, early stage CEOs are a target market for us. And then last but not least, we do a lot of work with venture firms, so venture partners, particularly operating partners in venture firms and PE firms. Again, sharing our methodology with them in a hope that they can use it to improve the results of their portfolio companies.
Right. So what lessons in the book would have saved you the most pain earlier in your career?
I definitely say the demand gen planner, it's a pretty critical tool in terms of understanding what needs to be happening and what is happening inside the funnel. And so having that or a little bit earlier in my career, I think would have definitely helped me. I think the other one that we mentioned earlier a little bit is that sales cycle versus training analysis by looking at conversion rates in the stage by stage in the selling process. That's a really good tool for diagnosing whether you have a sales process issue or a sales training issue.
Right. So then Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
I was just going to say those are the two tools that I wish I'd had a little bit earlier in my career.
So talk us through those two tools a bit more. Like, how do they work? And if you feel you wish you had them earlier, why?
I think on the demand gen planner, it gives you, it's essentially a bottoms up planner. So you take the revenue numbers you're trying to hit, you take the average deal size that you're currently selling, and it works it back up to ultimately determine, how many marketing qualified leads or how many even raw leads do I need every single week to hit my number based on the conversion rates that I'm actually seeing in the funnel right now. And so part of the exercise is it gives sales and marketing a common target or a common set of metrics that they can both drive to. The other part of it is it's really crystal clear in terms of setting those goals and helping sales and marketing and anyone in the go-to-market function understand, hey, here's what needs to happen. Even if it's not happening today, we can slowly improve and work towards achieving that objective. So I think it lays out a really fact-based roadmap for anybody in the go-to-market process to understand what's happening, and then having the weekly conversations, you can just decide on the strategies and tactics you're going to use to improve that given area. The second one is conversion by stage. So we're basically taking, let's say, 6 months worth of opportunities and looking at it by rep. How many meetings did this rep have in the discovery, in the demo, in proposal, in negotiation, in closed one, and just creating a line graph that shows their conversion percentage. And it's interesting because you tend to see two different patterns. You see a tightly clustered pattern where all of the reps are performing very closely together, right? And if you've got some major drop off in that area, that would tell you that you've got a sales process problem. So you've got to go, for example, figure out, why am I not converting a lot more meetings out of discovery? I got to rip the discovery process apart, figure out how to improve it, and then put it in. Versus if you do that same graph and you see the lines are more widely spread apart, that is going to indicate a training issue. So you might have 2 or 3 reps that are off at the bottom, and there may be new reps or reps that are struggling with a particular stage in the sales process. And so we can go apply some additional training to those reps. But it helps us really understand, is this an individual issue where I've got to go work and coach the individual or individuals who have this problem, or do I have a larger process problem here that I need to go tackle?
Very scientific, isn't it? It's like you're literally measuring each part of the process. You're starting off like, okay, what are my goals? And then you're reverse engineering, okay, how do I now get there? And then when you set the process off, it's consistently and persistently monitoring each stage as you go along and understanding, okay, which is the weak point, what's deficient, what's not working, what the weak link is that's stopping us from getting us to our goal, right? And it's, from the way you've just described that, very meticulous, almost scientific, and it's a numbers game.
Hence revenue chemistry.
There you go. Absolutely. I love that. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Superb name. Great content. And I think it's something that, it comes down to ultimately know your numbers at every stage of the process, not just your revenue, not just what your costs are, not just your ad spend or whatever, but like every step of the way. It's a metric. And the numbers tell you everything you need to know.
That's right. And I think the other piece that we've come to appreciate using these tools is they're facts. So they're undeniable. It's not, hey, I've got this set of numbers, you've got that set of numbers. I mean, how often do you see executive teams spend, the first 15 minutes of their meeting discussing where they got their numbers? And everyone shows up to the meeting with a different report that says kind of the same thing, but slightly different. So I think one of the key values is aligning everyone around a common set of facts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Facts and data, they tell you everything you need to know. And oddly, like, so many people want to avoid them. So many people don't want to look at them just because they're almost scared of seeing what the truth is. So now, if you could go back to the very beginning of your career and give your younger self one piece of advice in context of what you've built in your trajectory, what would that be?
I think it would have been to get into the scaling process earlier. I've really enjoyed it. It's what I've dedicated my career to, and it took me about 10 to 15 years to realize that. And so I would have, I think, enjoyed things a little bit more if I started in the scaling process earlier.
Right, absolutely. So, scaling a business isn't about hacks or growth tricks. It's about building systems that actually work. That's what I'm hearing from what you're telling me. And that's, I think, super important for people to hear. You and your team at Revenue Chemists have spent decades doing exactly that, helping companies move from chaotic growth to predictable revenue. And I think that's super important for this entire audience that's watching and for future up-and-coming founders. And with AI now reshaping the way businesses operate, those systems matter more and more and more. And understanding the numbers and the data and the facts behind them. And I think you set that out very, very clearly. And I think your book is going to be super interesting for many, many people to delve into. So, Carter, closing remarks, one piece of advice you would say to a new founder who is every department in their company?
I think the closing advice I would give is, whether it's a tool like the Demand Gen Planner or an other set of metrics, make sure you understand what's happening in your business so that you can work on your business.
Love that. And Carter, tell us, where can the audience find you? How do they get in contact with you? When can they expect to be able to buy your book? What's the best way?
Yep. So feel free to visit us at www.revenuechemists.com. You can reach me directly at carter.perez@revenuechemists.com. And look for the book in the late May, early June timeframe. It will be entitled Revenue Chemistry and will be available on Amazon.
That's superb. Well, I wish you every success with the launch. I wish you every success with what you're building and sharing. I think what you're trying to do, or what you are doing by paying it forward, is a credit to yourself, a credit to the business, and something that we can all learn from. Carter, thank you very much for sharing your experience and your insights today. Wishing you all the very best.
Thanks so much, Dylan. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you.